During the course of just 7 years, the name Dark Souls has become almost as much of a recognizable name as Mario or GTA. It's honestly to the point that it's become a franchise that needs next to no introduction. It's a series that constantly strives to screw you over at every turn, and of course, it's gained a reputation for being very difficult. Thanks to an insanely dedicated fan base, the franchise has spawned a total of 5 games now, 3 of them under the Dark Souls title. Dark Souls 3 is now arguably the most complete and expansive full game From Software has crafted yet, but it may come at a cost for you. Dark Souls 3 actually entered development in the middle of Dark Souls 2 production. The project was immediately set to be headed by Demon Souls and original Dark Souls director, and I think I'm gonna mess this up, Hatake Miyazaki, who did not take a significant part in the process of Dark Souls 2. As a result, he found himself running development of 2 games simultaneously, with the other being Bloodborne. However, Dark Souls 3 also brought over the co-directors from Dark Souls 2, and I may mess this up again, Isamu Okano and Yui Tanemura. I'm sorry guys for messing up your names. They were used to initiate the lead development as well. As a result, the combination of these 3 creative minds crafted a sort of greatest hits of the Souls franchise. Throughout the game you can see some references to previous titles that even people like me, who is by no means an expert on the specifics of the Souls series, will find similarities interesting. Miyazaki even brought over elements he introduced in Bloodborne, specifically broadening the scope of weapon variants as well as general enemy and map design. Incredibly, the team managed to meet the release date yet again with their 3rd game in 3 years. Although it was met with a rather strange English workaround only for the Xbox One after an early launch for Japan, it successfully reached its desired worldwide date in April of 2016. Rise, Ashen One, because it's time to dive into the lore of a Dark Souls game. I'll admit up front that I have never been one to invest into this world. The story isn't fed to you, and can only be obtained through environmental detailing and item descriptions, but it comes at a cost for someone like me, because it's very easy to overlook what's being told to you as a result. A simple search for Dark Souls 3 lore will give you all you want and more. But for the time being, I'll try my best to provide what's going on here, even if it may not be 100% accurate. Now, as the Ashen One, you roam through an extremely varied and rather enriched set of landmasses in order to maintain the Age of Fire. Your ultimate goal is to return the souls of the 3 previous Lords of Cinder, who were these heroes who have linked a powerful flame across the world, as well as the current Lord, Prince Lothric, back to the original throne in order to maintain the link within the Firelink Shrine. It's an interesting, if a bit too abstract, outline for a world's background that fits the franchise perfectly. Although my somewhat brief Wikipedia paraphrase could never do what is actually going on justice. I highly recommend you dig deeper into the lore for yourself if you find any of that intriguing at all. Dark Souls 3 continues the trend of establishing its trademark difficult gameplay. It's strategic, it's precise, and it's kind of the same thing it's always been. Now don't get me wrong, the evolution from Demon Souls to Dark Souls 3 shows obvious alterations from along the way. But if you've been following these games for those 7 years, fatigue on the formula could definitely raise questions. Not to mention that the rise of Souls-inspired material, such as Lords of the Fallen and Salt and Sanctuary, have made this once completely unique franchise not quite as novel as it once was. All that said, the possibility for fatigue is Dark Souls 3's biggest flaw, because From Software has really crafted a solid game here. As briefly hinted at earlier, the variety of playstyles and weaponry has been extended way more than it ever has. As per usual, you can customize your class to whatever you want. Because I tend to suck at games, I stuck with the boring and typical sword and shield combination, just so I had a chance to beat this game. Yes, it is still a very hard game, especially for someone who hasn't played this series to the extent that others have. For those unfamiliar, the difficulty of a Souls game has always originated from its mechanics. Animations mean everything, from your dodges to the very act of swinging your weapon. But what makes it fair is that every commonplace enemy and boss has those exact restrictions as well. Granted, size may not be as proportionate, but conquering these larger tribulations is what provides some of the best satisfaction in all of gaming. That said, you are still meant to die. A lot. Every enemy you kill drops souls, which acts as both your currency and criteria for leveling up your character. When you die, you lose all those souls regardless of how many you've amounted, and you get one chance to reclaim them. Die again, and they're gone forever. It's just another backbone of what balances between brutal difficulty and fair play. Now, I didn't play Bloodborne, but I got about 2/3 of the way through Dark Souls 2 before I put it down. mostly because I didn't find the level design to my liking. Yes, I am aware that Dark Souls 2 was pretty polarizing to begin with, but it didn't help that I felt the middle sections of that game suffered from poor dungeons and annoying enemy placement. My biggest fear before diving into Dark Souls 3 was whether or not something like that would ever happen again. Fortunately, Dark Souls 3 has generally more appealing approaches to level design, bringing back some of the elements of Metroidvanias that was somewhat absent in its predecessor. However, that still doesn't change the fact that the best that this game has to offer is definitely near the beginning and near the end. That's not to say these parts are particularly bad in the middle, they're certainly better than those later portions of Dark Souls 2, but just expect some weaker environments. I actually put this game down for over a month before I was able to get back in the swing of things, just because the middle sections can drag on at times. As par for the course, Dark Souls 3 presents a variety of large and overbearing boss fights to challenge you as you proceed throughout the world. These have always been the most challenging and rewarding aspects of the series, and this game is no different. Some of the creature and general entity design is astonishingly well done, not to mention that each and every one requires specific strategy and tactics in order to gain the upper hand. These will be the portions of the game in which you probably die the most, but finally conquering your opponent is part of what makes these games work as well as they do. Some of them require gimmicks that I can't entirely get behind. You know, a boss may require a certain weapon to be beaten with, but it was still a strong aspect of the game. Perhaps my favorite element of the Souls series has always been the social elements, whether it means reading the random messages that appear on the ground, or the ability to summon other users into your game to help you fight. It's a great gathering of a community that barely has any downsides to its structure. Barely. There's also been a focus on invading other players' games just to kill them, which I can get behind because it's become a normality for the series at this point, but what I can't get behind is cheaters. I played the PC version of the game, and even though this only happened once, I was summoned by someone who was cheating. I mean, look at this! This is ridiculous! Everyone would die in one hit, that guy's head was giant, it was just a confusing situation all around. This one guy almost single-handedly ruined my game. Moral of the story, play the game the way it was meant to be, guys. Please. We've already seen games released in 2016 that look a fair bit better than Dark Souls 3, but that doesn't mean the game looks bad. I personally think the environments look good, if a bit more vacant than what we've been grown to accustomed to. On every platform, its visual style is definitely serviceable, though its technical performance has varied results. The frame rate can be rough on every platform, though I strangely only had drops in the hub area for some reason, so it wasn't too bothersome from my experience. Crashing has also been somewhat of a prevalent issue for others on PC, but I will say that only happened once for me. Maybe dig a little deeper into information for the version you'd like to get before picking it up. Perhaps some aspects such as the frame rate problems will be gone by then. On a positive note, the music is outstanding, if a bit underutilized in my opinion. You see, most of the time when you're walking around, there's not really any music going on at all. It's just the ambience of the world, with the sound effects and everything. Music typically only comes into play during boss fights or large encounters of the sort, which is kind of a shame because this music really is spectacular. I wish it carried over into more parts of the game. Dark Souls 3 is perhaps the least surprising release you can get. It's essentially a summation of several different mechanisms that From Software has developed since 2009, and as a result, you have a fairly by-the-books Dark Souls title. If you're in it for the traditional and raw gameplay, then this will be just as enjoyable for you as the previous games were. However, if pure intrigue is what drives you through these journeys, then be prepared to be a little let down. For whatever it's worth, this is actually the first Souls game I actually finished. So maybe that means this will be a fine starting point for a new player? Regardless, it's hard to argue with the notion that Dark Souls 3 is an objectively solid game. As long as you're alright with the game's outline going in, you'll enjoy your time with Dark Souls 3 in the same way that I did. However, veterans might find it to be a bit of a soulless conclusion.